Hello and welcome to another episode of Midierror Meets, the monthly music podcast where we talk to a wide range of people from the music industry. This month I'm speaking to Steve Grimley-Taylor of Thonk, which is a Euro rack retailer selling kits and cases and everything you need for your modular synthesizer. Steve's ran his own record label. He's also been instrumental in Brighton Modular Meet. He works with Tom Whitwell on the music thing Modular, and he has also released records on Planet Mu. So we had plenty to talk about, and we met up in Brighton early this year to discuss all of those things. What were your first memories of music?
My first memory of music was my mum playing the Pastoral Symphony quite a lot. I can't remember the composer, but I used to sing that like a maniac as a 3-year-old. But I guess the point where music really started to excite me was, it came a lot from television, I think, which was quite common in the late 70s. Through hearing things from the radiophonic workshop on programmes and Doctor Who, things like the music from Tomorrow's World. It was just a really interesting time because you'd get the kind of influence of something like Kraftwerk on theme tunes on TV, which was really strong, but then also kind of weirder stuff from the radiophonic workshop. And then, you know, it was a really fascinating time for pop music because you were coming out of the 70s, out of things like disco, I guess what was coming out of New York, which is disco, hip-hop, punk coming out of New York and London. There was just so many new forms of music at that time, and that had such a big influence on the British charts. And also for me, you know, just hearing synth pop for the first time as well.
Mm. And what sort of bands were you listening to when you were in your teenage years? What sort of stuff were you listening to?
I guess once I got to my teenage years, it was sort of 85, 86. There were things in the charts like Jackie Body and Mars and Paul Hardcastle, and there were lots of kind of electronic and sampler based things, and those haven't really converged into genres at that point, and that was a really interesting time. But also I remember kind of the first De La Soul album being a big deal, and
3 Feet High and Rising.
Yeah. Which again, it's a great album, and it has a really strong. I guess it has a really strong lineage to electro as well, and a lot of kind of sampled synth stuff on there that I really like the sound of. And then I kind of then went on to listening to a lot of I guess industrial music stuff, maybe on Mute Records, and kind of heavier stuff like Ministry, Ninth Rep and that kind of stuff. And then I moved to Sheffield. I was living in Coventry and I moved to Sheffield, which one of the reasons I went there was because the Warp Records shop was there, which was really good. Mm-hmm. And Warp was still in Sheffield, and there was still interesting nights happening. And then that kind of evolved into an interest in Detroit techno and Chicago acid house, that kind of stuff. And that's the point when I started making music as well.
Oh, really? Oh, you got in. So what sort of early stuff did you use to make music? I guess it was about 93, I had a Roland R8 drum machine, which was really good. Very good machine.
I had a Novation bass station, which was okay, wasn't so good. You can't, I don't know, there's only so little you can spend on an analog synth for it to sound great.
Do what you do, yeah. Was it the rack mounted one or the keyboard?
It was the keyboard one. It was not. I mean, it was nice. Actually having a synth to tweak was a lot of fun. I mean, that definitely got me started. But I guess at that point the big thing was Akai had just put out the S2000, which was I think it was the first really capable but affordable sampler. You know, people have done amazing things with the S900 and 950, and the limitations on it were great, but the S2000 in terms of memory and outputs and effects, I think, you know, it just made it so easy.
Was it 32 megabytes of RAM? 16 maybe?
I think, yeah, maybe 32. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe not even that much. Maybe it was 16. I mean, I think the 950 had a meg. I just don't remember. But that was amazing, you know. And that, I think also, my involvement with music at that point, I was kind of involved and really friendly with the guys who ran a label called Spy Mania, actually, who are based in Brighton, where I live now, who were based in Brighton. And they put out the first records by Square Pusher.
Wow, really?
And then later on also Jamie Liddell as well, who's in Supercollider, and then was a solo artist on What Records. So
yeah, I think I have some of his records. I think I do have a couple of Supercollider. Isn't Supercollider also a program?
It is also a program
making music.
Yeah,
a bit like Pure Data or something.
Yeah, very much like that. But I think totally text based. But the band was Christian Vogel and Jamie Liddell. That was quite a big influence later on me. But yeah, at that point, it was really interesting what people like Square Pusher were doing with samplers. And I think that actually there's a line that goes through all the music, and a lot of things that I've done is embracing an absurd level of work, of kind of flow and workload to get something done, of either crazy intense editing or just getting into the fact that a lot of polish is required for getting music finished.
Yeah, I think the first time I started thinking about that level, because Square Pusher is like hyper polish and it's so many minute edits go to his work and details and melodic details as well, isn't it? In Square Pusher, it really blows your mind. I remember I listened to Mike Paradinas a lot when I sort of went to a library and saw this record with a reel-to-reel machine on it, and I thought, oh, that might be quite cool. And it turned out it was Mike Paradinas' album, and yeah, he was always very articulate, sampling stuff. But yeah, you're right. When I heard Square Pusher, it was just that taken to the next level, like micro details.
Yeah.
And he's always pushed the boundaries, really, hasn't he, Square Pusher?
Yeah, he really has. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, what happened with Jungle and that kind of stuff, the Square Pusher stuff, and I did a record on Planet Mu that was around 97. That was very similar levels of hyper editing. It burned very brightly, all that stuff, but it was kind of like punk in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Jungle the same really came to a kind of fairly logical conclusion, and then didn't change. It hasn't really changed much since the late 90s.
I think they were a lot of the Jungle records as well. What's great about them, like the electro records, the early electro, they were born through limitations. They were born through limitations of the hardware, of the amount of gear people had. You couldn't make 100 tracks of audio and fill out every frequency range. In Jungle, you had your bass line and a break and maybe an effecty sound, and that's what gave it the atmosphere. And so those limitations were great, weren't they, back in the day?
Yeah, I guess that's totally true, and certainly when tracking to tape, that's very true. But I guess what happened from about 92, 93 onwards is that actually the limitation didn't so much become the technology as much as your own time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, what bred those hyper detail records is that because you weren't having to do a one shot to tape, you could sit there and finesse MIDI endlessly and infinitely. Then you could spend as long as you wanted on one song, and then I guess by about 96, when things like Cubase VST came out, and then suddenly you were free to work on easily 16 tracks on an average computer, then time became the currency, really.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? Because you can pour
people pour weeks over sort of 8 bars of music. And yeah, I think I've definitely tortured myself over hours and hours of making music, and you just make it worse, don't you? You just make it 10 times worse. You put out a record on Planet Mu, did you?
Yeah, I
That's
did.
Amazing.
I through Spymania, I got to know Mike Paulinus, because he was putting together a compilation of I guess what now is like the post Square Pusher stuff, and and Aphex Twin was starting to change his music at that point as well, and he was pretty heavily influenced, I think, by Square Pusher. And so I did a track on basically the first compilation that Planet Mu did in about '97. So the first song I put out was on a compilation with Aphex Twin, which was pretty nice.
That's amazing. That's just a bit awesome.
Just out of the blue, really. And then I did I think it was like the 4th release on Planet Mu, and I helped Mike master the first Jagger album as well, the first release. So I was kind of a bit involved in.
That's brilliant.
In the early days of Planet Mu, and then it didn't last that long, and then I ran out of money. I mean, even though I was actually making a bit of money then from music, which was a fluke really, but I started working in video games at that point.
Was music in computer games an influence for you? Is that something that sort of got you into games, or?
I think that certainly the kind of chiptune stuff that you'd hear on Commodore 64, the crazy limitations involved to make those things make music was even if it wasn't a conscious influence, I'd spent a lot of the 80s listening to that, and it was, even though it wasn't like the music in the charts, they seemed to be progressing at the same kind of pace in complexity and technology. So it was a deep influence on the music, even if I wasn't making chiptune stuff. But I guess when I was making a lot of music in the 90s, and it was this pretty intense process of putting stuff together, the kind of stuff I was doing, then I was playing quite a lot of, I guess, SNES, PlayStation games at that point. It was quite a good way of taking your brain out of just sitting in a room for 12 hours a day and writing music.
Yeah.
Not the most healthy thing to do as opposed to making music, but what was interesting was that suddenly there were quite a lot of jobs in games, when things like the Mega Drive and the SNES had been pretty big, but when PlayStation came around, it really opened it up to a mass market that meant there were lots of jobs available. So my background, my education was I did a degree in computer-aided engineering design, and that was kind of industrial applications of 3D modelling basically, and that led me towards quite a dry career. I just did it to get out of my hometown, and but what was a much more interesting avenue for that, all those 3D modelling skills, was video games. So I actually started out a company called Codemasters as a games tester, and I kind of got the job because they were about to do this product called Music, which was a music production platform on the PlayStation. And so I spent the first few months just hammering, testing that program and writing tracks with it, and
that must have been great.
It was, yeah. Well, it was a great way to get into the process of developing video games, because it was constant communication with the developers on what was working, what wasn't working. As a tester, you just end up knowing something absolutely inside out. But coupled with actually trying to write tracks in it as well, and getting feedback on different ways that you could interact with it. I ended up making a lot of decisions that I could see change the design and stuff like that. So
I wonder if the ability that you had then, or the opportunity you had then to make decisions musically, have influenced where you are now, and it put you in a position to make those same choices for hardware, maybe.
I guess I think I've always been a finisher. I've always been a polisher. I've always seen the benefit in not leaving something half finished. That's not to say 99% of the things I do are finished. They're not. But the point is to really take that 1% and know the value of just doggedly just getting it finished. So
focusing on it, yeah.
And that was the thing I learned most from making video games is, and it really helps when you're on a team, but it's like you are attempting to make it pixel perfect. You're attempting to remove absolutely anything that doesn't fit in with a design ideology, and to make sure that the experience of the user is just as seamless and obvious and transparent as possible. So yeah, that has absolutely affected everything I've done since.
Yeah, and I guess because it's a music-based piece of software, I was talking to Kenny Young about the joining of like the user interface, the controls, with the sound and how important that is.
Yeah.
And he said about a couple of times where all he'd done was change the sound effect on a certain part of a game, and everyone else thought the gameplay had got a lot better.
Yeah.
But all it was a simple thing that he'd changed, like the attack on a couple of the sounds, or there was something less repetitive. So yeah, it's interesting that the fusion of making of testing a music program for a console is, yes, it's the unity of the whole thing with the sound too.
Yeah, and it becomes. I mean, with that product in particular as well, if you just in a completely abstract way look at what people who were good at using it were doing with their hands, they could be playing a fighting game, and so adding a kind of a level of dexterity to something like music production is really interesting, because obviously that link is strongly there from performance, but it wasn't at that time. There wasn't a strong link between using a DAW or Cubase or a MIDI sequencer with that kind of dexterity. So it was interesting. It felt quite new.
I wonder what would have happened if they'd have made those music making programs for the SNES or for the Mega Drive, like made a tracker for them. That would have been amazing, wouldn't it?
Well, there was a thing on the SNES called Mario Paint, which was I think it was a painting program, but it did happen to have a music creation.
Yeah, it's like a notation thing, isn't it? I've seen it. Yeah.
And there was a label called Erdal Discs who just did some amazing music. Like, I think they came out of Acid House, and then they just went off on their own crazy tangent. And there was a great record called Mario Paint, where they just took a bunch of different kind of techno artists and just made them make a song of Mario. And they were just like, it was almost like that black MIDI craze.
Yeah,
people are, there's 700 modes a minute or a second coming out of it. So yeah, the people were already, really misusing technology like that. I mean, actually, I then went into doing sound design and managing an audio department in a video game company. But
yes, so that was relentless.
That was relentless. But actually, before that, I spent a year working at Lego, and that was about 2000, I think, and that was really influential because I got to spend a lot of time. I was based in Slough, but I actually got to spend a lot of time in Denmark as well, in the main design offices.
Nice.
And again, that really focused me even heavier on product design and making products that are just absolutely kind of as airtight as possible and finished. And
Rock solid, yeah.
Yeah, and I got involved at that point in. They were trying to make musical games with Lego, and there was a working group on that, and I actually was supposed to be making like a racing game, designing a racing game, which I think did come out eventually. But I realised that in a company like Lego, there's like 20,000 employees. It's insane. And you could, to some degree, you could kind of end up doing what you wanted. And so I decided I was just going to spend a lot of time in Denmark with this group who were looking at making music products. And Lego would just throw money at that stuff, even if there was no result. And yeah, getting involved with, helping test the music program on PlayStation was one thing, but getting involved in the actual design of music software basically was one of the things that influenced me then to move into doing basically game design into doing sound effects, sound design, ambience and music for games.
Yeah, so then you went to Bournemouth to study sound design.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing, there's lots of upsides about working on teams of people in video games. One of the downsides is that companies in the UK just go bust constantly. So I think I got made redundant 2 or 3 times. That was pretty much less than average as well in the 10 years or so that I was making games. But I could see that I was going to get made redundant again because it's all due to the way that games are funded. They're just incredibly expensive. And if you don't move straight onto another project, then companies just go bust. It's really cutthroat.
Yeah, I remember Codemasters turned into Blitz Games, didn't they?
I don't.
Something along those lines.
I'm not sure they did. I think they may be. I think Blitz was actually originally a split off from Codemasters. But I think that was a long time ago. Right. But the companies they're all constantly changing form and adapting and kind of. Just trying to stay alive all the time is, it can be incredibly lucrative, but it's so expensive.
Yeah, I think it's easy to see the lucrative big winners and not look at all the. I mean, there are some terrible games made. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
Do you know Stuart Ashens? Do you?
I don't know.
So he reviews stuff on YouTube. He reviews like bad. Just generally shit from Poundland that's rubbish and talks about how rubbish it is. But he has got a computer gaming background and he's written 2 books called Terrible Old Games You've Probably Never Heard Of, which are hilarious, both of them. They're really good. He's just released the second one, which was Attack of the Flickering Skeletons. But if you're into old games, you're into old games that are terrible, I'd really recommend those books. They're really funny. For like, in games where you've got like all the frames of animation of Sonic the Hedgehog running, and there's like 16 frames. Yeah. He's got a book and there's 2 frames of animation, and he explains what each of those frames is doing. It's really funny.
Nobody really wants to make those games. That's the thing. The people making them didn't want to make them that bad either.
Definitely.
But compared to. It's such a world away from sitting in your bedroom making music on your own to the amount of money required to support 20 or 30 people working together on a product. So
yeah, especially if it overruns, if you haven't quite got it how you want it, like you say, if you get a sort of work ethic from a company like Lego, you know what's a good product. You know you can't release this now, even though the deadline is next week. So then, exactly, the financial considerations must be pretty big.
Yeah, they
in
are.
Those situations. Like games like Driver 3, do you remember when that came out? And they made
it for years, haven't they, I think?
Yeah, they took ages, and then they just basically bribed all the magazines to say you've got to review this and tell everyone it's good, and it was terrible, and then the internet uprose against it, and about a year later a good version of the game came out, but by then there was no hope for them.
You can't do that anymore. You can't get away with that anymore. The internet has certainly made that a lot harder.
Definitely, absolutely, yeah.
The flip side of that is, I know a lot of people making games who, have stopped or really don't want to engage anymore because there's also there's quite a dark underbelly to the way that fans interact with games. That
really,
there's a very abusive culture from gamers online.
I guess they're very. It's sort of a bit like music, isn't it? Maybe they want to play the next game they want from you. It's got to be a bit similar to the last one, but not a world away.
Yeah,
you know, it's not like the Amnesiac Radiohead album, which everyone's like, "Oh fuck that! It's a load of electronic bullshit." You know,
that was the one I liked.
Yeah, me too. I love that album. That's one of my favourites. But that's the one where I think people who like wanted it to stay all guitar-y, just like, "What the fuck are you doing?" But obviously, it took them in a great direction.
I think there's something about, and that influenced why I ended up starting Thonk was. There's also just incredible secrecy in the games industry, and sometimes it's for good reason, because there are millions and millions of pounds or dollars invested in things, so people get very paranoid about anyone finding out what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a real loggerheads with the way information's shared on the internet these days. So it can be kind of very isolating, especially if you're kind of very technology focused as well, that you're not really able to interact with your peers, and you're not really able to interact directly with customers, and maybe you don't want to because it can be quite negative. But that's what's been really interesting about the synth explosion in the past few years, and modular synths in particular, is there's a very tight, constant dialogue between the manufacturers, the shops and the distributors and the people using it, and that's very fulfilling.
Yeah, and it's a very supportive community, isn't it? I find that's the thing that is refreshing to me. Yeah, there's a lot of companies that don't tread on each other's toes, and they do share ideas, and things are open source. Yeah. That's the other amazing thing that blows my mind, is the open source thing.
Yeah, you couldn't get further away from certainly that video game culture that had come from incredibly private. Nobody wants anyone to know what they're doing or how they've done it, to working with someone like Tom Whitwell, who makes the music thing Modular, designs the modules that I then sell and make kits of, is just a total dump of, here's everything I did to make this. You can go away and make this yourself if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an honesty in that. There's also quite an interesting bravado in that as well, of, come on, have a look, tell me what I could have done better. And people do, and there are always things that can be done better.
Yeah, I think there's a good educational element in there too, because you can anyone who doesn't know how it works can look at the code and say, oh, okay, that's that button press happening, and then that goes to there. It's good.
I think it's amazing. I think the thing is, I think someone who's my age, who, I went to university in '93, and really the internet became a usable thing in '93, '94, '95. It was clunky, but being there at the start and then seeing it evolve into things like mailing lists and forums, and for 10 years everyone was just scrabbling around trying to work out how to make these things useful. They were fun, but no one knew how to make them useful. And then about 10 years ago, that started to really solidify into very niche communities starting up, sharing a lot of knowledge. And then I think what you've seen with the modular explosion recently is the access to knowledge just being so great now, and the barrier to entry for anyone wanting to either use this stuff or start designing it is just so tiny now. It's it took 20 years to get to that point of the internet maturing.
So you described Thonk as being like a hardware record label. You did also run a record label prior to starting up Thonk as well, is that correct?
Yeah, no, I run with a friend, Laz, run a label called Hand on the Plow, we started making music together, I guess kind of early 2000s. We decided to start making a vinyl record label at the point where vinyl sales were just plummeting through the floor.
The right moment.
Do you know when you look at the graph of vinyl and it does that thing where it just goes to nothing mid 2000s and then shoots up into the sky? We did a record label at that point where it was diving into the ground.
So just in the time where there was like, brilliant, that's perfect timing.
But creatively it was really successful, and we got really good critical feedback on it, and it opened a lot of interesting doors, and we ended up doing a record on Matthew Herbert's Sounds Like label as well. And it was the music was pretty different from the stuff I'd been doing with Planet Mu earlier. But yeah, again, it kind of ties into that whole enabler thing, and with a kind of a manufacturing deadline on getting vinyl made, and that feeding back into how quickly you might have to get the creative process done. I found that very creative as well.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that process of being focused on ultimately getting a physical object made or getting product done was a big influence on Thonk as well. And I kind of learned the skills of communicating to people how they need to get stuff done
without grabbing their head and
there's
forcing them to do it.
I mean, that's the thing. It makes me feel a bit old, because I don't know how, when you make purely digital music, you know when it's finished, because there's nothing like having a date set in stone where you're going to go and have a record cut to focus your mind to go, shit, I don't want to let myself down here. I don't want to let other people down. That is an incredible focus to have. And if you don't have a record label who are providing that structure for you to say you need to get this done, I think most people can't. It's very few people who can work without those kind of
I think
structures.
that's very true. And like we were talking about Jungle having limitations, those limitations are good to keep you to make sure that you do it. Mylar Melody said the same thing, of give yourself a deadline when you're making something, because otherwise it will just go off. And actually he gave me my deadline to start the podcast, because I was like, I don't know if it's ready, I don't know if it's going to be good enough, don't know if people are going to like it. And he was like, just have a bet with me now that you're going to do it on October the 1st, that's when the first one's going to come out. And I was like, I don't know, it's not good enough, no one's going to like it, it's going to be shit. And he was just set yourself a deadline. So I do have him to thank for setting me a deadline for getting this off the ground.
I think you talk about Jungle, the part of it was those hardware limitations where you literally couldn't perhaps do more than you'd done, but also there was a very strong dub plate culture. So there was always, I think, for the more successful artists, there was always a strong, they'd want to have it finished maybe by Thursday so that they could get a dub plate cut on the Friday, so that they were playing it out with the Blue Note on Friday night or whatever, So I think whenever you look at really successful scenes like that, there are always drivers like that are pushing people to get things finished.
Limitation is a good thing. So cool. So that must have been useful for your hardware record label you started called Thonk. So that came off the back of Tom Whitwell's Turing Machine. Is that right? Yeah.
So he designed this module that I think instantly, as he was describing it and demoing it, people were going, "Oh, that's what I've been looking for." It was a way of taking what was really interesting about modular synths, which was being able to harness kind of random generation of notes or CVs or modulation levels, but be able to use it musically. It had a feature where you could have a continually random stream of notes, but then you could kind of lock whatever the last 8 or 16 were and create a loop, but then have that loop gradually crawl or morph over time into something else, and it was just instantly hands-on and musical. And he put it out of that open source with the idea that people could just get everything they needed manufactured themselves. But it just tied in with me noticing a lot of different producers out there making PCBs and stuff, and it just became obvious to me that I could become a distributor for this stuff and make a store, make it easier for the designers to focus on what they needed to be doing, which is just design, just looking at how to make musical instruments. And yeah, that was the start of Thonk, and it tied in with also me getting made redundant for the third time from a games job. And it was one of those I think I've had a few times in my life where I'm like, this is a brilliant idea, someone should do this, and then I didn't get off my arse and did it, and it's like, yeah, there we go, okay. So I seem to be able to have ideas that could be successful.
Yeah, that's good.
It was the first time though that I actually did it instead of talking about it.
Cool. Well, you've done really well with it. You know, you've obviously implemented everything very, very well, and you've set up a very respectable company with a big audience. And yeah, are you the sole? Are you the only place you can get the music thing?
It's still open source, so anyone could make it themselves. But I think we've just done it at a level where we've made it a no-brainer to buy it from us, because we're able to do the kind of volume that let us sell it at an attractive price, yet still make a profit that supports the company, lets the company keep growing, and it's let us add so many other products and pull in, stuff from all around the world. We've become a kind of a synth DIY supermarket. So we spent a long time really without much competition, and now there's stores in the States that do the same kind of thing, but we kind of all work together really. The market is growing at a rate that we can't cope with, which is a nice place to be, also quite stressful and frustrating at times, but
yeah,
there's 6 of us now at Thonk, and we're still growing, and we're still not even nearly meeting demand, and there's just a constant flow of new musicians becoming new customers with us all the time. So I think people thought it might be a bubble, but if it is, it's still growing, or at any rate, the people designing instruments still aren't satisfying how many people there are out there wanting to get into it.
Yeah, it is huge, and it is sort of growing exponentially, and more people I know make music are talking about it. And I mean, even things like VCV Rack, which has come out, which is like a software thing, reactor blocks, all that sort of stuff. It's emulating Eurorack.
Yeah.
So yeah, Eurorack in general is huge. But yeah, it is a supportive industry. That's the amazing thing I find. So you go to, am I right in thinking you go to like Super Booth and where do you go to sort of show off your stuff?
I also help run an event in Brighton called the Brighton Modular Meet, which actually is where I met Tom Whitwell for the first time 6 or 7 years ago. And we've grown from it being 20 guys in a church hall to being, a couple hundred people now.
It's really good. I went last year. It was absolutely fantastic. Really good event.
Yeah, it's just I think what really brings it together now is there are so many interesting artists using the technology as well. It did start in a place where you'd feel like this is fascinating stuff, and I love these synths and I love what I'm getting out of them, but are they truly tools that musicians are going to use? And people sometimes create these monolithic systems that might be a joy to use, but they're not the most productive tools for making music at the end of the day. They're a great way of just spending all evening enjoying yourself but maybe not achieving much. But I think what's really happened in the last 2 or 3 years is you're seeing how artists are taking the technology and maybe stripping it down to the bare essentials of what they need to really actually make music in either in context of a commercial career or a totally creative endeavour.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the boost that's given it longevity. people are now looking at the way artists are using, putting together Euro rack systems, and they look at what maybe Aphex Twin had at Field Day, or you see LCD Sound System appear and Jules Holland out of the blue, and they've got a stage full of modulars, and they're not just there for show; they're really using them. Or someone like Surgeon.
I was going to mention Surgeon.
He doesn't DJ anymore.
Yeah.
Really, he just takes out this pretty small 2-row case and does improvised techno. Or an artist like we had Russell Haswell play at the Brighton Modular Meet, and he's on a totally experimental kind of noise music tip.
Yeah, he supported Ortega at the Concord last year.
Yeah.
We were stood right by the speakers. It was mental.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of difference between the gear that he's got and Aphex has got, or the LCD Sound System have got. In a way, that is, and the difference between those types of music is pretty large. But the way that people like interacting with it, what's good about it from a user interface point of view is the same. So that's been heartening to see artists getting into the sound.
Do you have like an R&D process then for the stuff that you sell? Are you making music on a Eurorack and decide, we need something that does this?
Yeah. I mean, that's constantly happening. But the way that the community exists and interacts with itself is the conversation. That is the constant conversation. At the moment, I mean, that's kind of where Thonk started. It would be like blatantly, there's no affordable DIY solution of a sample and hold or something. We've got to try and get that into the store. But to be honest, now it's just an avalanche, and we just try and pick what we can out of the avalanche that we think looks interesting and get it out there. I mean, one problem with the modular stuff is it's expensive, so it isn't accessible to quite a broad range of people, and the community is not the most diverse either. So one thing that really attracted me to DIY was to both enable people to get into this stuff a lot cheaper, but it also has an aspect of, if you start learning how to put this stuff together, you can fix it. You're a lot less likely to throw it away. You're a lot more likely to have a direct to have an attachment to the gear that stops it being just gas, stops it being just the gear acquisition syndrome thing. You're not just buying for the sake of it. So, and I know that I've got customers who build their own gear and then they've gone on to be able to fix other pieces of gear as well. So there's something quite democratic and more sustainable about DIY as opposed to retail shopping.
Just buying, like consumerism. It's sort of and everyone I know who builds a Eurorack, if they do have a faulty module or whatever, they do go and try and fix themselves, and if they can't, they know someone who can. Someone like Matt Copeland. You know Matt Copeland? He's an amazing guy. I know he's a friend of mine, and he's just able to draw schematics for you on a table of whatever you need, and that level of knowledge is really phenomenal. But he's got there a little bit like someone who was at the Modular Meet last year. Look, Mum, No Computer. I think I read he's only fairly recently got into electronics, in the last 6 or so years. And what he's building now is absolutely phenomenal and really inspiring for people to go, wow, I can pick up that, and it's fun, and it's a tactile object. It's not a thing on an iPad that has no sort of soul.
I think I first met Sam about when I was starting Thonk 4 or 5 years ago at a Modular Meet, and he was, even at that point, he was kind of wild-eyed about the stuff. He was looking at it going, I've got to start making this. And he's a great example of someone who's, the the speed at which he was able to. I mean, he's a very talented person. Don't get me wrong, but the speed at which he was able to get to where he is now, of building these huge machines, is because of that just rich, dense knowledge that's available. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks that Thonk might be almost like self-defeating one day. I might
really
maybe I'll enable people too much, and then they'll all be able to do it all.
You're essentially marketing kryptonite for yourself.
but I love that. I love that idea that it, it will. I think that. I guess I'm, as Thonk is a centralised resource, and I think what you've seen in the last 20 years is eventually the centralised resources of knowledge kind of do either just dissipate and change, and who knows what, people will just be printing stuff at home in 10 years maybe.
Possibly. The way I like to look at it is that there will always be people who don't know everything about it. There'll be people that drive themselves to know everything.
Yeah.
I think time is also an issue in everyone's lives, isn't it? How much time can I devote to learning how to build a PCB and then getting it made in China and having it come back, and patience as well, I guess, comes into it. So I don't think you are creating something that's self-defeating. I think there will always be people that are new to the scene that are inspired by it. Some people don't want the DIY. This is why I make the RP that Jason Hotchkiss designs.
Yeah.
He designs amazing things, and I bought it as a kit, and I realised, probably people would want this as a finished product. So I approached him in 2015 when I happened to move to Eastbourne, and said, maybe I could sell these as finished products. And that, that's gone amazingly well. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still shifting a lot of kits, but there is still a market for people. People approach him all the time and say, can you get this as a finished product? Is anyone making this?
Yeah.
And they come to me. So I guess, I think there's always people that haven't.
Well, there's also, I think what's happening as well is there's a generation now of people who don't consider anything other than building it themselves. And because things like Thonk have been around long enough and become perhaps people's first exposure to modular synths or that kind of tool, that they're native to it. They actually don't consider that they'd buy this stuff themselves. They've always come from the viewpoint of making it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in that category because I'm such a stingy bastard with my money, I always buy broken gear off eBay and module and kits.
Yeah, and in the same way as when you get older and you see kids doing things with computers and you just think, how did you know about that? How did you get into that? They've been doing it since they're 11, and that is happening with synth DIY as well. There's other ways people are getting into it that are enabling them from even younger, and also the way that you can buy parts directly from China now as well. It's the globalization of the market has made it openly available to the West.
And I think as a company you've diversified your product range quite a lot. Like you don't just sell DIY kits, do you? You've got desktop synths you sell, like the Bastel.
Yeah, we do a few bits of desktop gear. It's interesting though that stuff doesn't sell as well and easily for us. It's not. It became really obvious at the point where we tried to start selling some desktop stuff. It's very attractive to people doing the modular stuff, and also very attractive to people who are maybe interested in the modular but don't want to dive in totally. But that stuff still falls outside of this whirling community that is self-sustaining.
A little bit.
That was an interesting lesson, and that self-sustaining community is eyed up by bigger companies and corporations jealously, and they realise that we don't need them, but that we hold a lot of information that they're really interested in. And it's true of a lot of the magazines as well, like Future Music, Sound on Sound. They really see the value from a positive point of view of what has been built But they also understand that we don't need to advertise in their magazines because we have people sitting there already part of the community waiting to see what we're going to do. So it is quite a punk thing.
Yeah. And it's sort of you can be dynamic when you're a small company or like a small sort of industry. You can be super dynamic. So if let's say someone on the Muff Wiggler forum says, "Oh, why isn't there a module that does this?"
Yeah.
3 months down the line, they can have that module. There can be a company which sets it up and does it. Whereas Roland's, who are just knocking off another 909 clone or another T08 clone because they're a bit scared of what they might be able to make.
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing. I think it's really good because those big music companies that got lazy, a bit like I wish something like this would happen to the film industry.
Yeah.
You know, because like all the big films are like remakes and Alien versus Predator and all that sort of shit, where originality has just almost disappeared from the mainstream films. This is great for gear. It's really good because it makes people like Korg and Roland and all the big gear makers, they have to, and Arturia as well, they have to now step up and make great gear. And I think we're starting to see that happen a little bit.
Yeah, I 5-10 years ago, I didn't have a lot of respect anymore for the products coming out of Korg and Roland, I guess, and that has changed. I mean, it's still not for me, maybe what Roland are doing, but then they humbly partnered with Maleko to make the recreations of their 100M modular, and they weren't being manufactured, I don't think, at Roland. I think they were manufactured in the US at Maleko, who are a Euro-rack manufacturer. So I think they do see what's happening and how they can interact with that. I mean, Korg as well they obviously had a guy who was pretty visionary working there, who I can't remember his name, but he's now left. Japanese companies though are slow to adapt. It's exactly the same as video games. Looking at what a company like Nintendo would do, it almost takes somebody to die for company cultures to change. It's not like it's not flippant.
Require a hitman in the competition. They go, right, get that guy in.
It's not a flippant or morbid comment, but those the benefit,
fresh blood.
What makes Japanese companies perhaps so incredible in some ways, of having such incredible focus that isn't as market-led as American companies, is also can be their downfall, where you see Roland churning out the same average products for 15 years, but they have changed. So
yeah, they have. And what also springs to mind, talking about like modern big manufacturers, is Teenage Engineering. They were sort of like renegade, they were the indie sort of. They had the indie mentality, the punk mentality, but they were able to translate that into really fantastic products, really well designed. Really, like what I love about the OP1 is it's got industrial faded like knobs and potentiometers. Like they are seriously hard wearing things. There's not what's it called, like planned obsolescence. There's none of that sort of. In 6 months' time, we'll know this is going to break, like they did with the Xbox 360s, wasn't it? After was it like the 90-day warranty, or 3-year warranty came to an end, and they just all suddenly had the red rings of death. I love the philosophy of Teenage Engineering because they make it like all the pocket operators are brilliant. For the money, they're amazing machines.
And they're the companies like Teenage Engineering and Electron as well.
Yes,
I think they obviously come from the same mindset as a lot of the modular companies, but they're trying to compete with Roland and Korg, and that's the nice thing about the modular world, is it's not competing with those big companies really. It's starting to become the case, but it is its own thing. I think I've been really influenced. We've been lucky in the UK to have the independent record label culture, and that DIY culture is really strong in the UK. And the other influence I had, that is another thing that makes me think I can start a business. I could do this. Is actually looking at what happened in something like skateboarding, where there was a huge kind of uprising in the 80s of skater-led companies who said, we don't want to get involved with Nike or those big sports companies, we'll just do this ourselves. And the weird thing is, you find a lot of people into independent music in modular synths. There's so many people who are ex-skateboarders, and there's a really strong culture of just taking no notice of what the corporations are doing or big business, and just making your own scene. And so Tony from Make Noise is a keen skateboarder and came from that culture as well. And it's a very, very strong kind of self-led kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess it's you could just again call it that punk spirit, or like an alternative mentality where you're not relying on the establishment to tell you what music to like, or tell you what products to buy or what clothes to wear. It's like the people I know who are surfers. They're very different people, but they're very much their own.
Yeah.
They're happy to be doing what they're doing in their own way. They don't need the big brands or anything like that.
No, you take your core of your strength comes from something outside of commercial culture. But that's not to say though that record labels and people making skateboards and people making synth don't rely heavily on the machinery of corporate culture though. We're just subverting it.
Yeah, that's
not we're not Marxists seizing the means of production. It's but there is something more democratic about the way that we're using those big systems to make something not
that's
wholly
good.
commercial.
I have to look out for that new skateboarder element of music now, because it's always been computer games. So yeah, what are your sort of flagship products then? What are your flagship things at Thonk?
The Music Thing modular range is really our bread and butter. It's what allowed us to grow really quickly. So the main modules really are, there's the Turing machine, which is a really nice way of musically interacting with random generation. So there's a white noise generator in it that produces constantly a random source of voltage, and then you're able to kind of either tap off notes from that, or there's expanders to the module that let you create other outputs. So you from the one module you can have it controlling the note value, you can have it controlling your cutoff on your filter or the depth of the envelope. But yeah, as the randomness slowly crawls and changes over time, all the things you're controlling it with are also morphing organically and interconnectedly together. And it's a very easy thing to use, even though it sounds very complex to describe. When you just use it, you're really just turning one knob to control all the functionality. And I think the reason it really caught people's attention is that it can become the heart of the modular and be the source of the interesting source of everything interesting that comes out of it. And it seemed like people like Surgeon have it in their system, and they, it is one of the beating hearts of their system, and it powers the way that they work. It's great for improvisation, but it's great for improvisation that sounds very musical.
Yeah, and I think I heard Tom Whitwell talking about it, saying how it's like a cognitive thing that humans like. We like repetition, but we also like something that sort of pushes our expectations a little bit. And I think it feels to me, I don't have one, but I have played with one. It feels to me like it's ticking those two boxes, which is like excitingly experimental and randomness with sort of not strict parameters, but it's not going too far that it becomes sort of really abstract jazz.
Yeah, but I guess what it lets you do, which if you're interested in the mechanics of music, it really lets you play with that line, and it lets you explore. You find yourself making judgments that are really interesting about, I've gone too far, that is just random now, and yet you change one tiny element and you're suddenly like, no, now that's techno, or now that's sounding a bit like Steve Reich or Philip Glass, or so I think people just really took to it because it's a really useful tool, but it just lets you explore randomness in a musical way. And then one of the other big sellers for Music Thing is a module called Radio Music, which on the face of it is basically a sample player. It has an SD card in it. You can have 16 gig of samples on it. But it has this kind of conceit, which is it's set up like a radio station. So when you start playing a long file, if you then change the knob called station, which essentially changes the file, if you move to another file and then move back to the original one's still been playing in the background like it's a radio. And it's a very simple concept, but it just pushed people to use samples in just a slightly different way than they had before. And there's a random aspect to it, but yeah, you can re-trigger reliably at different points in the sample. Some people stick an amen break in there and do use it to chop up jungle, and you can do that.
That's cool.
But because it's got such a huge capacity now, I think you can put up to a 32 gig card in it. People just take huge long recordings of stuff, and it's serendipity of what might end up playing.
I know for me personally, we've been in the studio and there's been the radio thing in the background when we're playing synths and stuff, and the amount of brilliant, like you say, serendipitous moments where you've decided to take the kick drum out and the radio thing's going and it's a scientist talking about the television in the 70s, and there's something about it really working really well. Yeah, like you say, on the face of it does something very simple, but yeah, it's a really, really, really great machine. And I think it's a bit iconic because the other week someone posted something on Twitter about a DX7 programming tape that came with the DX7. It's like 45 minutes of a man going, select operator 4 and turn up. Maybe it's not that long ago, it was in the 80s sometime. But Mylar Melody's first response was, that's going straight in the radio. Like it's so iconic.
And I think it's tapped into as well. Like I've talked about this kind of whirling community of constant feedback and interaction. But actually, the radio music's kind of what happens when you've got modular synth is you just generate hours and hours and hours of recordings if you're not careful, or if you're careful. Some people don't record anything, which is just as bad. But what people start doing is take that huge archive of recordings and stick it on the card, put it back in the radio music, start sampling themselves again from the output that they've been, all those noodles and jams they're creating. So it's become a tool to recycle and reuse material as well, which is
such a genius idea.
Yeah, it's just really, and that's the nice thing about the modular format is you just put very simple but nicely interactive tools out there, and it's going to end up interacting with 400 different modules, and people use it in totally different ways.
It's amazing. One of my questions here was, do you have any modules used in a surprising way? You just sort of answered that question. Yeah. And I've never even thought of doing that, and it's super simple, but it's like the resampler. Ableton has a resampler in it, which I wish all DAWs had. But even that, for the radio thing, you can put your own stuff in it. I think Lego World talks about doing that, doesn't he? Like sampling, just playing the keys for a bit and chucking it in. And I remember I used to do that, making music, and I always thought, this isn't the right way to make music. This is just some amateur stupid thing I've invented, or not. I just I'm recording myself playing it badly. Is this allowed?
Well, that's I think we're at a really good point as well, where people have realised what the benefits of different tools are, and I think I remember when I started making music in the early 90s, I thought that everybody was recording stuff in a single take and that all their tweaks on the synths were done in one take and they would produce these perfect things with pure skill. And then you realise later on, actually, they just recorded that synth line 8 times and then they're just cutting between different tracks of it. And that, again, is another way of using radio music. But then on the other hand, it's a super reliable thing to have in your modular where you can just know you're going to play something back and it will be exactly the same. Because it's all very well constantly having, free form modulating madness, but sometimes, certainly if you're gigging, you might want to be able to snap back to something reliable. So we see quite a lot of artists using radio music for that reason, like Chris Carter. I think he did a show at the Leeds Modular Meet last year and he had like 3 or 4 in there. Scanner as well uses it as well. It just sits on a nice boundary of being reliable yet experimental.
Yeah, I know there's a guy who I really like called VCO. He used to be called VCO ADSR.
Yeah,
I think he's based in Brighton. I really, of all the people who make modular, his stuff to me is like perfect. It's ridiculously good. It's the music I want to hear when I go to a club. And he's said about doing those things, which is preparing a few synth lines for your performance. So it's not just like, oh God, where have I gone with this? Everyone's leaving the room,
It's been interesting hearing. Actually, he just changed his artist name. He's called Ebsidic now.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting watching Phil, how he's changed the way he approaches performing live. And I mean, I don't think that there are that many people out there who are as dedicated as him to constantly working out how to take modulars out there and keep evolving with it, really. I've always been into hardware synths, and I've always kind of played about with modular stuff. I just heavily got into Nord modular in kind of 97-ish, 98, because I couldn't afford a hardware modular at that point. They weren't so easy to get hold of affordably, or it just wasn't easy. So I've always kind of worked with modular gear, or that or Max MSP and that kind of thing. But as much as I enjoyed that, the computer was a barrier to a certain way of working. And when I started putting together a Euro rack, I realised that I was spending all day at that point in my day job cutting up digital audio. So I was just looking at a screen 8 or 9 hours a day, cutting up audio, and going home and pulling the modular out, there being no screen. Sometimes I'd be recording, but sometimes I'd be satisfied to just sit and play and turn it off 4 hours later and be satisfied. And it felt more like playing an acoustic guitar than interacting with a computer, because there's a meditative edge to it, and there's not a drive for resolution or to create a product or a finished piece of music. So it's a real outlet compared to what modern life is like. I think it's different.
Yeah, it definitely is that. I've never thought about the parallel between playing acoustic guitar, but you're exactly right. That's exactly how it feels. I work in my day job staring at a computer all day looking at audio, so I'm really not inclined to go home and do the same thing.
Yeah.
But I guess for me the outlet is, okay, there's a lot of Max MSP is my outlet, but soldering stuff and making kits. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, you don't look for resolution when you're playing with modular, do you? Sort of,
It's healthy, I think, and it doesn't tap into it. It feels like a separate thing to commercial culture and consumerism. It's not the same kind of thing. That's not to say there's not a heavy consumerist side to any musical instrument, of course, but
Mm.
you're a lot less likely to fall into familiar paths than if you go out and buy a Strat and a big muff pedal. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I just to talk about your modules, you have a tape head module that's music thing, isn't it? Was it Magneto? Is that called?
Yeah, well, there's a range of 3 modules that 2 of them are currently out, one's coming soon. The Magnetophon, which is a cassette tape head mounted into the module or into a wand, and then you can play cassette tape like scratching a record. There's Microphony, which is a kind of a contact mic preamp, so you can contact mics just give you a whole other world of sounds to explore. That you stick it on electronics or machines, and you can produce sound that you don't normally hear produced through air. And then Electrophon has got a guitar pickup in it, and again you can pick up sound in a way that is quite unnatural. And you put a guitar pickup on the side of a refrigerator, and there's a huge, beautiful, constant drone piece.
Yeah, Brian Eno's in your fridge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's another point. Tom from Music Thing and I have gelled, is that a lot of that stuff is influenced by things like Stockhausen and Steve Reich and Philip Glass and minimal music from tape music from the 60s and 70s, but also I guess the kind of New York school of experimental music as well. So they're really focused on just different interesting inputs to get into the modular. Laurie Anderson famously had a tape piece which was cassette tape kind of strung across a violin bow. Oh no, the tape was on the violin bow, and then the violin had a tape head in it, and then she'd bow the tape.
Wicked.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that range, the Fon range, is that it's very DIY again, because actually you can almost make machines that interact with those things, like putting tape on spinning wheels or making an interesting box to put contact mics on.
Yeah. Since I've seen that module, which was only a couple of days ago, when you're demoing it you have a strip of lots of different tapes on A4 and you're going back over it. I thought that was absolutely amazing, and I will come back to you on this. I will design the perfect thing that will use them. I was thinking like a sort of a pulley, some sort of pulley system where the tape head was on an arc, and you could do something like that. But there's scope for something to take that to some amazing level.
Yeah, totally.
For sure. You see bands using a lot of tape, like Sculpture, who are a fairly local band. They use tape loops and things. And I saw Holy Fuck as well. I don't know if you know them, Canadian band. Yeah. They had a tape thing, but it was a time code machine he was using, because I spoke to him afterwards. It was a time code thing with film on it. But it was like a big thick tape. I don't know what it was, but there was sort of like 5 reels of it, and when he pulled them, it would play back this sample.
Right, nice.
Yeah. And
I see. So he's got, instead of audio on the tape, he's got time code written to the tape. So then if you're controlling something else with that, then you are directly controlling the speed of it. It's interesting.
He said it was from it was for film, for time code for something. I just sort of went out to him after the game, like, oh, what's that amazing thing there?
I think what's lovely about the modulars at the moment is there's a big loop happening as well, because all of those things like the tape things, or that time code thing you're talking about, is we're almost looping back to what was happening in the 60s now. What people like Terry Riley were doing with just a pair of tape machines to make a constantly evolving loop of music, or back to the early days of, again in San Francisco, of Morton Subotnick, who was using the early Buchla synthesizers, and the modulars are giving people ways of interacting with music that were being experimented on 50 years ago now, but we're a step up. We make it, it's easy for anyone to get involved in that way of making music, and you just cannot make normal commercial sounding music with this stuff.
Yeah, it tries you might.
Yeah, it's going to push you somewhere weird, and it won't sync with Ableton, and that's a good thing.
Yes, yeah, you're right, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the tactile element is something that people may be missing. You know, I'm really against technology. I'm so anti-technology for what I do. You know, I have a very old phone. I don't have a smartphone. I don't like touch screens. Screens everywhere for me, like sort of this cyberpunk future of humanity. So yeah, I love the tactile nature of just having a tape head in your fingertips. I think that's just such an awesome thing.
I think that I know what you mean about the kind of the touchscreen thing. I think it is interesting to see what companies like Google are doing though, and they are what they've done with image processing with something like DeepMind. They are starting to work on with audio, and you know, in some ways, I think perhaps while interface design and things like Modular is still evolving, the guts of what's happening with analog synths or DSP synths behind the scenes, the rate of change of that stuff isn't so big. So it will be really interesting to see how actually a company like Google can throw their big data method of working and seeing what happens with synthesis. And they just released a new synth that
I saw it. Is it the N Super?
Yeah,
synth
it's fully open source. At the moment, it doesn't sound that interesting. The interface isn't that interesting, and it will develop slower than anything visual because there's a much stronger interest in visual culture. But when you look at what crazy images they're producing with like the DeepMind software, you know, that will come for audio as well.
Yeah, I think in the video they combine like flute and a snare, don't they? And you've got like this intermediate area which is a combination of the two, which reminded me a lot of that MIDI mutant thing. Have you seen the DX the Raspberry Pi thing that Aphex Twin was working on? I love that. I think that's great, and I think you're right. The sort of neural networky stuff, could take us in a new direction. There is a really great thing called the Infinite Drum Machine, which is a Google-funded project where you've got a group of sounds, and wherever you click in this group, they're similar sounds. So it's got like, I don't know, 100,000 sounds, and it's just gone. These are acoustically all similar. And then you can use them as a drum machine. You can pick any of the sounds.
There were tools like, I mean, people have been trying to develop tools like that for sound designers as well, because one of the really interesting things about doing sound design is that you have to interact with sound at a level that is beyond. You don't think about how a sound was produced. You just start thinking about, do I need a kind of a friction sound, or do I need a impact sound? And it sends you off. When you get good at it, you get really good at going off on tangents and looking for sounds that do exactly the job you need, but don't come from anything like the real source of what you're trying to score. So ways of grouping sound together in a purely sonic texture, you know, that is the future. And I don't see that in 5-10 years a thing like a radio music isn't going to have that capability available, because the speed at which the computing power in the radio music, this little teensy chip on the back of it, puts a home computer from 15 years ago to shame. And it costs slightly less than a tenner, and it's tiny. And it almost making something like radio music with it it's not even beginning to push what it can do, but it doesn't matter because it's cheap as anything. So I think that's where the evolution is going to come for musical instruments. It's going to be in the tools that let you more quickly get to the interesting content. And the generation of the content might not change that radically anymore, but you know, and it's still going to be the people with a good ear that make the best out of those tools. It doesn't. We don't want it to get to a point where it just does it all. It never will. It never will, and it never did. Like, you know, people in the 80s thought that, you know, I don't know, someone like Depeche Mode on Top of the Pops, they just came on and pressed play, and it was It never was. It never has been the case.
Yeah, that's
it never will be.
The skeptical electronic music haters are always the Chemical Brothers just press play. They really don't just press play. Orbital as well probably had that level at them.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's been a really good chat.
Yeah,
thank you very much for talking to me, and all the best with Thonk.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Well, it was really great to catch up with Steve. He's really a man of many talents, and I didn't know that he'd set up Brighton Modular Meet, which is a huge event that's growing and growing and growing, like the Eurorack industry is. It was great to chat to him. So next episode, maybe next month, I don't know, next episode anyway, is going to be with somebody who is a phenomenal performance artist, who is very much at the forefront of the technology behind making music and the manipulation and control of the sound. That's all I'm going to say. Right, I am midierror. This has been midierror Meets. We will rendezvous back here in approximately 1 month's time. Thank you very much for listening. See you soon. Bye-bye.